Okay, let's get started. So thank you for coming, everybody. The idea here is to record some information that we've discovered and uncovered it's not new information, of course, but it's new to me. And I've got a particular angle of being a parent and a teacher in the district. I wanted to be able to find the sort of root causes of what I've been seeing play out in our district, in our community this year. This is called WCCUSD at the intersection between federal, state, and county laws.
Hi, are you recording?
Yeah.
I didn't hear the announcement that it's being recorded.
It said it when I first logged in.
I can see that it's recording.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry too.
Oh, no worries. It's good to make sure it is.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's a little red dot bulging.
Okay.
Thanks, y'all. So this subtitle is Community Research on IDEA Funding, FCMAT or FCMAT, Fiscal Oversight, and Local Budget Conflicts. And I started as a teacher going to the board meetings last February and got quickly pulled into the what was happening with the budget. We had cuts last year and kept feeling like, as a physicist, I look for this. There's something hidden here. There's some forces guiding this I'm not aware of. And I want to understand what are the underlying, the history and the forces outside of our little area here that are forming our situation. And so that's the research we've done. I've met with, connected with parents and former board members and current board members and teachers and just all across the community to try and understand and build community building in place of, policy making. Community comes first, and then from there we build a common narrative, and then from there we can understand what kind of policies we really need. So the WCC Community Building Group is just a loose coalition of parents, teachers, and community members uniting across WCCUSD to support our schools and amplify a common narrative that serves all communities. And our website is there, communitybuilding.nationbuilder.com. And I'm Sky Nelson. You can reach me if you'd like. There's a couple terms used that we'll come to a few times. IDEA is the Individuals with Disabilities Act, Education Act. Federal law requiring schools to provide special education services for students with disabilities. And FCMAT or FCMAT is a Fiscal Crisis and Management Assistant Team, a California agency that monitors and assists school districts in financial distress. And they operate largely through the county, so we'll refer to the County Office of Education quite a bit. So I want to start with the human angle here. Everybody's looking through a lens. Each of us looks through a lens. So I'm passionate about that perspective because it's important to recognize your perspective in order to pull away from the personal engagement or personal conflict or personal attachments you have in order to, find out what we can do together. So one lens that we could look at the situation with the district from 1991's budget deficit, which we had to take out an emergency loan. We got oversight from the state and by FCMAT, and the perspective that we would sort of identify them having so far is this, and they might disagree with this, but I'm not sure. You have a loan, you have to repay it. FCMAT's going to help by cutting expenses, closing schools, not necessarily visiting the sites, enforcing budgets through what feel like punitive measures, a takeover mentality that if you don't do it right for the budget bottom line, we're going to come in and take over and oversee you, and charging the district for that expense, assumes mismanagement, and has a rigid bottom line mentality. And that's sort of what the policies seem to indicate. Another lens that I think is important to understand, because this is the way many teachers are looking at this situation and community members, just to understand what the perspectives are. Here's a district trying to do all these great things for so many diverse kids. State oversight could help districts apply for AB 602 funding, which is extraordinary circumstances for special education needs, protect against lawsuits, acknowledge and deal with underfunding from the federal government, look for signs of mismanagement and provide best practices training, have a justice focus. And I would argue that if that had been done from the beginning in 1991, we probably would have solved some of these problems 35 years later, but we were really in a similar situation to then still. So when is the problem systemic? And this is not anything but my own definition. I would say when the outcomes don't match anybody's values, right? When we were having conversations about things and nobody's trying to make it happen that way, but it does. Budget cuts are something that nobody wants. But from a fiscal perspective, it seems self-evident necessity. From a teacher perspective, it seems deeply unfair. And from the parent's perspective, they don't know who to believe because they're reasonable professionals who have a sense of the budget, dollars and cents. They also care a lot about their kids and they want to understand what's the right thing to do. We're trying to find that common narrative that's like can weave all those threads together. And so I want to make sure you know these numbers are ballpark for simplicity, but they tell an accurate story. As a physicist, we do this a lot, right? We let go of the individual decimal places and we look at what's the story. And I've talked to enough board members and former veterans of the district and people in the community to know that this is pretty accurate. Special education students are general education students first. This is very important to all of us. They deserve our support. And while we talk about the funding for special education being inadequate, we're not going to be saying that's meaning that we shouldn't have special education. It means we need to fix the system to fund it adequately. I want to make that clear. Our goal is to correct systems, not people, by finding a common narrative we can agree on. So we're not blaming anybody for doing the wrong thing. We're saying the system is built so people have to do what they have to do and it doesn't work together. And so giving a timeline in history is where we're going to start. 1991, WCCUSD loan issued for $29 million. It took us 21 years to pay that off, 2012. In 2020, 8 years later, the oversight flags were re-triggered because of three conditional reports, budget reports. There's a partial overlap with the pandemic. So it's interesting to note that this is already happening, but the last report was actually overlapping with the pandemic, which is an extraordinary circumstance that everybody faced. And we never, looked back and said, maybe that wasn't our fault, but it's definitely a pattern already happening, but there's an overlap that's interesting to note. And there's a risk score of only 36% at the time, less than the 40% threshold. But we were still triggered because of those three reports with partial overlap with COVID. One-time COVID funds came in and temporarily stabilized the budget. That was actually a benefit for us. In 2023, the county issued a lack of going concern letter, put us back into oversight mode. Again, three reports that did not match what they needed to balance. There's been waivers given to bypass classroom funding minimums in order to balance the budget for the past number of years. And SPED costs have more than doubled over the past 5 years. Special education. In 2025, budget cuts back in the spring were made of 13 million or so over 2 years. And the threat of oversight if further cuts are not made, which became evident this past September when the board voted down the moving forward on a budget cut plan to pause it and hold off until we have more information. And that was we got a letter from the county saying that wasn't okay. Something along those lines. So June 2025, the County Board of Education overrode a local charter denial. And this is going to become relevant later when we talk about the reason for that denial. I think was lack of diversity in the school that was denied the charter, and we see that some of the education funds for special education are not equitably shared between charter schools and our districts like ours. So it has an impact on our expenses. The intersection of federal underfunding with county and state policy. This is really the point, right? We know we've been underfunded for a long time, but county policy and state policy are not wrong. There's an interaction that's creating a serious problem for us. What really got my attention is we're haggling over $7 million a year in budget cuts. We're underpaid on federal mandates by about $15 million a year. So that's not fair. Every interim report potentially triggers oversight rules, allowing no local autonomy. We just discovered that was the case. Attorney fees go unchecked and become a preemptive survival strategy. So we've seen attorney fees go up, as you'll see in a minute, the past 5 years. And we're negotiating with the teacher's payment and the students in the classroom, but we're not negotiating with the attorney's fees. There's a double standard there. And there's no apparent off-ramp from high-risk status with the oversight FCMAT policies. We're still engaged in oversight from them, even though we've been out of debt for 14 years. And budget timelines are not aligned. This is sort of a side note, but layoffs happen and reports happen in the spring, interim reports happen in the summer, and grants happen in the fall. So this misalignment makes it hard to balance the budget if we're being constantly monitored. What can be done? So this is a high level. I think this is the human way to put it. Acknowledge that the cause of our negotiations impasse and simultaneous budget mandated cuts by a county authority are caused by factors completely outside of our control. Federal underfunding and state laws combine with county fiscal oversight to create a Gordian knot that can only be resolved through holistic, coordinated action at all levels. And we can relieve the fracturing of communities by making it very clear to our communities that this is not our fault. We must work together to untangle the mess. And for those of you who don't know, we are at impasse with our teachers union and Teamsters union with the district. I believe immediate relief is possible. It would be helpful to recognize deficits from underfunded mandates, not mismanagement. So in the oversight process, we need to recognize that it's underfunded mandates, not our own mismanagement that's causing the need for help. We don't need advisors, we need allies. Provide modest bridge funding to cover federal shortfalls in the short term so we can actually figure out how to move forward in a way that's sustainable. Allow reserve waivers when classroom waivers are granted. So if we have waivers for not spending in the classroom, we can also have waivers to lower the reserve requirements. Fix inequitable charter rules retroactively for fair sped costs. And even declare a state of emergency in public education. And that would allow us to, for instance, fully fund schools by enrollment, not ADA. And I don't have data on this, but since the pandemic, enrollment in ADA have declined, and ADA especially has declined. And this is an important factor in every school in California. Long-term policy possibilities, and these are important. We discovered that Jared Huffman is already working on a law to pass and fund the IDEA Full Funding Act, HR 2598. Very important. The long game for sure. State law AB 602, we can decrease the threshold from nearly 8 times the cost of the average rate per student, make it less than that so that we can actually deal with extraordinary costs for special education. It's not done in a way right now that I think makes a lot of sense for our district at least. The state can fund schools by enrollment, not ADA. Charter equity, ensure costs are shared equitably and charter renewal appeal decisions are fair and not overridden if they add to the costs unfairly of districts. And FCMAT oversight reform, provide an off-ramp from high risk when gaps are primarily structural, such as IDEA underfunding. And the point is that, FCMAT is put in place to help districts maintain good fiscal health. But if the cause is not mismanagement, we don't need advisors, we need allies to deal with the problems and find solutions. Some data, special ed costs have gone from 22 million to 92 million in the last 10 years out of pocket. That's after we've paid for the federal portion from what we get from IDEA. So that's a huge increase that is very, very hard for us to cover and leading to all sorts of different encroachments on the general fund. Just the illustrative costs, again, these are not exact figures, but tell a story. The ADA funding from LCFF every year is $12,500 for general ed student. The actual cost is somewhere around $24,000 per special ed student per year for special ed, based on the numbers that are recent, which is the higher growth of that cost in past years. The extra cost is somewhere around 57 million for this narrative per year, and the details can be found at our website. What 40% of extra cost would mean, and this is what the law says, we would be reimbursed for 40% of extra cost every district by the federal government. If funded as promised at 40%, that'd be about 23 million versus what we got last year, which is about 8 million. So the estimated underpayment is about 15 million annually. We're just going to use that number as a broad brush to say, if we're underpaid 15 million a year, what does that do for us? And the IDEA 40% is an aspirational target via annual appropriations, not a legal requirement. That's important to understand. But shouldn't FCMAT want to address this systemic lack of funding rather than just penalize districts for not having their budgets together? That's our concern, our other concern. So the missing revenue, $15 million annually to scale. For comparison, $7 million was the recent budget cuts district-wide, half of the annual underfunding. So we're missing 15 million, but we're actually paying even more we're paying eight of that, but I can't make the other 7. 7 million would be the cost of filling our current 70 vacancies with teachers paid 100,000 salary plus benefits. $100,000 in salary plus benefits. So that's an obvious win if we could do that. 7.5 million is the 2025 amount our district spent on compensating families for private school tuition because we couldn't meet their needs. That's not even the kids that come into our school, that's the ones that go elsewhere. 9.8 million is the amount raised annually by the Measure T parcel tax. There's a lot of hardworking community members that are putting effort into making this tax happen, paying it, and it's barely even covering 1 year's worth of underfunding from the federal government for special education. And our lawyer fees went from 1.5 to $3.5 million since 2019, presumably defending against potential lawsuits for compliance. I don't know that. COVID one-time contributions to payroll from Dr. Moses, our CBO, were $5 million in 2020 and $30 million in 2021. Those are the COVID relief funds for the payroll. They'd be repaid by now with proper IDEA funding. As it is, we're still looking at those as debts we have to repay. But that's less than 2 or 3 times the yearly amount of underfunding. 29 million was the original 1991 loan. They put us into debt for 21 years and a state oversight. And that's like 2 years of the underfunding costs. So all the expenses that went along with that and the trauma of that and the amount we had to pay oversight for the oversight staff to come advise us was all money that was basically there spent because we were underpaid by IDEA for a couple of years. So these are just laying out the scale of the issue and why it's important for us to understand the whole issue when we're trying to we're having really big arguments about $7 million a year in budget cuts. The core problem is the double standard. We're being dinged every year for yearly budget infractions of only several million dollars against our cushion. We are regularly covering costs for federally mandated programs up to several tens of millions of dollars. And that's obviously not okay. And I think everyone would agree that's not okay. The question is, what do we do about it? Annual budget struggle and antagonism within our community is a real thing. We have zero wiggle room at the district for contract negotiations. They haven't, that's been a non-negotiation really this year. But there's no negotiation as far as I can tell with banks and lawyer fees. Those are fixed costs that don't serve the students directly. County board overriding charter denials exacerbated unfairness. So in June, when they overrode Richmond Charter Academy, I was in the meeting at that time. It was denied because of inequitable enrollment, I believe, by the local board, and that was not considered when they were not honored when they overrode the appeal, the denial. So that adds to the inequity because charter schools do not end up, in my understanding, enrolling as many special education students and having the costs that we have, but they get paid equally as we do from ADA. So there's just an inequitability in the law that needs to be fixed. We were blamed for insolvency when a number of adjustments could be made to make things fairer for us and many districts around the state. Madeline, you want to talk about this one?
Sure. I went online and looked at how California compares to other states in addressing best practices for making up for the national deficit where they don't help us to the degree they should. And so the 3 things they talk about as making a big difference, that would make a big difference in California, is if we adopted or expanded our high-cost reimbursement plan, right? Massachusetts, New Jersey, Connecticut, Wisconsin, Colorado all have models that reduce the year-to-year shock of the ultra expensive cases, right? We have the California excess cost pool, which is much smaller. If we scaled it to the size that Massachusetts has for the excess cost pool, it would be much more impactful. And our district, as a district that has a large number of children in non-public schools, would get a lot of relief. So that's one thing that we can advocate for with our state officials and electeds. The second one is to have create or strengthen a state safety net panel. Washington State has this, a process that gives the LEAs a predictable path to relief when there are incidents or severity spikes. So have this be a regular conversation in Sacramento and have a panel of people who address it and understand how this is impacting the budgets of all of our districts. And finally, using a tiered need weights and publish the cross subsidy. Pennsylvania and Minnesota align their dollars to needs and keep the encroachment in front of their policymakers at all times, so policymakers understand which children are that our kindergartners are paying for the costs that are associated with the higher needs children. I think these are really good ideas, and this is all very doable.
And Madeline, thank you. Madeline Cronenberg is a former board member in the district.
Right.
And it's really important to mention again, we are not starting a battle with charter schools or with special education students. We're saying these are the costs that need to be addressed. And to Madeline's point, that equitability would say that not just the students in the district should be paying the costs of special education needs, but the whole state, right? That should be taxable dollars,
Right.
not encroachment on the general fund. That's a big difference and a really clear difference. The special needs of the students are very important, and those come from the whole state, not from just the district. The needs of the money in the district. Is that right, Madeline?
That's exactly right. And that's what these other states have managed to do. So we have to recognize that California can improve. So
the rest of this is simply a summary of what we've said and maybe some more details of what could be done. I'm not going to go through them. You can take the community ideas link there. You can save them on the recording and pause the recording and take a look. We've talked about most of this, but we just want to be clear that there's a lot of options, and they're not all equally effective, but they all make a difference. And even just the option of making sure we understand what the problems are, so they're not us blaming each other for teachers being greedy or districts being mismanaged, but understanding that there's much deeper issues that are systemic. And systemic issues, like I said, are issues that nobody really likes the outcome because the system's making us do things that we don't want to do. So WCC Community Building Group, we are parents, teachers, and community members uniting across WCCUSD to support our schools and amplify a common narrative that serves all communities. www.communitybuilding.nationbuilder.com. Thank you for joining, and please tell us what we can do to help you make changes in your community and our larger community. Thank you very much.